Okay, let's dive in. Imagine wanting to build something that truly lasts. Not just a successful company for a few years, but, an organization that really endures for decades, maybe even a century. What makes those companies tick?
Well, that's really the core question behind this amazing research project we're looking at today. It was this huge, 6-year effort digging way back, sometimes over 100 years,
Wow.
trying to figure out what fundamentally separated these really iconic visionary companies from their direct competitors.
And they really went deep, didn't they? It wasn't just looking at spreadsheets.
Oh, not at all.
They surveyed CEOs, sure, but they also brought in ideas from history, biology, psychology, trying to find those timeless principles, right?
Exactly. They were trying to get at the sort of the DNA of these organizations. And our mission here is to unpack those key dynamics, see what drives that kind of endurance, and pull out the lessons you can take away.
And what's really interesting, I think, is how much of what we think we know about success just got kind of turned on its head by this research. They challenged a lot of common ideas.
Oh, absolutely. A lot of the myths around business success just didn't stack up. And that leads us to maybe the biggest finding of all. The builders of these visionary companies, they were mainly clock builders, not just time tellers.
Clock builders, not time tellers. Okay, that sounds important. What does that actually mean?
It means their main focus wasn't just hitting the market perfectly right now or having the killer product for today that's telling the time.
Reading the current market.
Right. Instead, they were obsessed with building the organization itself. The processes, the culture, the systems, the company itself was their ultimate creation. A clock designed to keep ticking for generations no matter what.
Okay, I get that. Building the machine, not just operating it. And I can immediately see how that would challenge some big assumptions, like needing a brilliant starting idea.
Precisely. Myth number 1, they just blew up. The myth of the great idea. It turns out you absolutely do not need a fantastic initial idea to build a visionary company.
That's hard to swallow, isn't it? We hear constantly about finding the next big thing.
Yeah, but look at the evidence. Take Hewlett-Packard. HP started with, tinkering, bowling foul line indicators, shock machines, even a harmonica tuner.
Seriously.
Seriously, they sputtered along. Nothing really clicked big until war contracts came later.
Okay, compare that to, say, Texas Instruments.
Right. TI, which started as Geophysical Service, Inc., was founded because of a very specific, successful, innovative idea, reflection, seismograph surveys. They had the great idea right from the start.
Yeah.
Or think about Sony. Masaru Ibuka started the company in 1945 with no product idea at all.
Right, the bean paste soup store.
Exactly. They literally brainstormed after starting the company, considered sweetened bean paste soup, mini golf equipment, their first real products, like that electric rice cooker, total failures. They survived making, crude heating pads.
While their comparison company, Kenwood, had a clear focus on audio tech from the get-go.
Yep. So the visionary company often didn't start with a brilliant concept.
Okay, so the idea isn't the key. What about the leader? The magnetic, larger-than-life founder figure.
Ah, yes. Myth number 2, they busted. The myth of the great and charismatic leader. Again, the research shows you absolutely do not need that kind of leader to build an enduring visionary company.
But wait, people always point to figures like Walt Disney, Sam Walton, George Mark. They were certainly influential.
They were influential, yes. But the key finding is that the leaders at the comparison companies were often just as persistent, just as driven, just as influential in their own ways. Charisma wasn't the differentiator.
So what was the difference then?
It wasn't the personality type. The research is full of visionary CEOs who are, frankly, not charismatic at all. McKnight at 3M, described as soft-spoken, quiet, gentle. Ibuka at Sony, reserved, introspective. Bill Hewlett. People remembered him as a friendly, matter-of-fact farmer. Procter & Gamble, kind of stiff, reserved guys. Bill Allen at Boeing, who led them into the jet age. A pragmatic lawyer, shy. George W. Merck, the embodiment of Merck restraint.
That totally goes against the grain of the celebrity CEO narrative we see so often.
It really does. And get this, the research even hinted that having a great idea brought forth by a super charismatic leader might actually be negatively correlated with building an enduring company.
Negatively. Why?
Because the focus can become too much about the person or the idea of the moment, rather than methodically building the underlying organizational strength, the clock that can outlast any single individual or idea.
So the real masterpiece isn't the product or the personality. It's the company itself. The clock.
Exactly. But it's not just a cold machine. The source material talks about it being a clock with a spirit. And that spirit comes from their core ideology.
The soul of the clock. Okay, tell me more about that.
These visionary companies all had a core ideology, basically, a combination of core values and a fundamental purpose that went way beyond just making money or maximizing shareholder wealth.
That's interesting. Why isn't maximize shareholder wealth a strong enough ideology? We hear that all the time.
Well, the research found it's just weak. It doesn't genuinely inspire people deep down across the whole organization.
Oh.
Shareholder return is important, obviously, but it's seen as an outcome, a result of doing something meaningful, not the fundamental reason for existing.
So what's the deeper purpose? What drives them?
Take Merck. Their stated purpose for decades has been preserving and improving human life. George Merck II talked about being inspired by advancing medical science and serving humanity.
You can feel the difference there.
Totally. P. Roy Vagelos, a later CEO, said flat out, business success means victory against disease and help to humankind. And this wasn't just marketing fluff. It was there even when they were struggling to survive early on. Their centennial book was called Values and Visions, not, a century of profit.
That gives the work meaning. What about others? Ford.
Henry Ford's early purpose was clear. Build a motor car for the great multitude, make cars accessible, provide good jobs. He kept lowering the Model T price even when demand was crazy high. And that $5 day wage, revolutionary. Driven by ideology, not just profit calculation.
And H.P. Packard had a similar view.
Yeah, David Packard was very clear. He said profit is essential. It makes all of the proper ends and aims possible, but it wasn't the end goal itself, their main job, to design, develop, and manufacture the finest electronic equipment for the advancement of science and the welfare of humanity.
That's the genius of the A&D they talk about, right?
Yeah.
Purpose and profit.
Exactly. You don't have to choose. You figure out how to achieve both. Johnson & Johnson's credo is maybe the most famous example.
Right. The hierarchy.
Yeah, it explicitly puts customers first, then employees, then community, and shareholders, last getting a fair return, mind you, but last in the priority list. And they lived by it, especially during the Tylenol crisis.
Unlike their comparison, Bristol-Myers, who tried a similar pledge later, but it didn't seem to stick the same way.
The research suggests it felt tacked on, less deeply ingrained. It wasn't just about having the words on paper. It was about the ideology being truly pervasive and guiding decisions.
It has to be authentic.
Absolutely. Even look at Philip Morris. Controversial industry, obviously, but their executives showed this real, almost defiant passion for their pro-smoking ideology, framing it as individual freedom. Contrast that with R.J. Reynolds, where executives seemed much more focused purely on profit. One RJR chairman basically said he'd ditch tobacco if something else made more money. That lack of a deeper core is telling.
It really makes you think about what motivates different companies.
Yep.
The source mentioned a kind of thought experiment, the serial killer game.
Yeah, the random corporate serial killer game, it's stark. Imagine someone offers you a ton of money for your company, guarantees jobs, but their only plan is to shut it down immediately, wipe it off the face of the earth. Do you sell? Why? What would actually be lost if your company just vanished? It forces you to think beyond the financials.
Look, that's deep. Okay, so you've got this core ideology, the soul. How do these companies then translate that into actually moving forward, making progress? How do they, wind the clock?
Well, they have this relentless drive. They avoid getting comfortable. And a key tool for that is setting what the research called big, hairy, audacious goals. BHAG.
BHAG. Love that acronym. What defines a BHAG?
It's a huge, compelling, long-term goal. Often seems almost impossible at first. It grabs people, focuses energy, and really stretches the organization.
Like Ford wanting a car in every garage when cars were still rare.
Exactly. That was audacious back then. Or Walmart aiming to become a $1 billion company when they were tiny, and then later setting goals to double in size again and again.
IBM renaming itself International Business Machines when they were small and mostly domestic.
Classic BHAG. Set a huge aspiration that drove them for decades. Motorola's massive bet on the Iridium satellite phone system, billions of dollars on a completely new concept. That's a BHAG.
And these big goals, they aren't just random shots in the dark. They connect back to the core ideology.
They often do, yes. And crucially, achieving them isn't just about having a great strategy. It's about having built the organizational capacity to actually pull it off. Look at Boeing.
With the 707 and 747.
Huge, risky bets. They committed billions to build those jets. Why did they succeed where their competitor, Douglas Aircraft, faltered? Douglas was cautious, waited to see if the market was proven. Boeing had the internal drive and the organizational muscle built over time to take that leap.
So the BAG requires the strong clock behind it.
Precisely. It's not just the goal, it's the engine you've built.
Okay, beyond BHAG, what else fuels progress in these companies?
A lot of it comes down to experimentation, trial and error, opportunism, even what the source calls purposeful accidents.
Purposeful accidents.
Yeah.
Like happy accidents.
Kind of. The idea is like Darwin stumbling on new insights with the Galapagos tortoises. You can only stumble into something interesting if you're already moving, exploring, trying things.
You have to be in motion.
Right. J&J didn't set out to make surgical dressings. They sort of stumbled into it from another product line. Marriott evolved from root beer stands to hot shops restaurants to hotels through trying different things. American Express.
The traveler's checks.
Yeah, that came about because an executive had a frustrating trip trying to cash letters of credit. It was an accidental discovery of a huge need, and 3M is famous for this. Post-it notes, waterproof sandpaper often came from experiments gone sideways or just pursuing curiosity, like asking, why does this guy want these samples when others wouldn't bother?
So it's a culture of trying things, being curious, not being afraid to stumble a bit.
Exactly, which is the polar opposite of what happened at Texas Instruments later on under autocratic leaders. They apparently crushed that kind of experimentation culture through intimidation, shouting, throwing things. You can't have happy accidents in that environment.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got the clock, the soul, the winding mechanisms like BHAGs and experimentation. How do they manage the people, the culture, the cogs in the clock?
Well, a really critical piece is how they handle management talent. The research found visionary companies are far, far better at developing and promoting managers from within. Homegrown management.
Promoting from the inside, mostly.
Overwhelmingly, they consciously invest in management development, succession planning. They're thinking years, decades ahead about leadership continuity.
Why is that so important? Why not just hire the best outsider?
Because it helps avoid what they call the post-heroic leader vacuum or the savior syndrome. When a strong leader leaves, companies without this internal pipeline often flounder and feel they need to bring in an outsider, a savior. Think about Colgate after its key leaders, or Zenith, or even Disney after Walt. They struggled with succession, often brought in outsiders. IBM hiring Lou Gerstner was actually unusual for them historically. They'd usually had deep internal talent pools.
So promoting from within helps preserve that long-term vision, that continuity.
The evidence strongly suggests it's really, really hard to stay visionary long-term if you're constantly importing leaders who don't have that deep, ingrained understanding of the company's core ideology and way of doing things. These companies develop insiders who can drive change, yes, but while preserving the core. P&G was famous for having talent stacked like cordwood, ready to step up, all steeped in the P&G way.
People who already understand the soul of the clock, as you said.
Exactly. And that ties right into the idea of cult-like cultures. Now, the researchers use that term descriptively, not judgmentally.
Okay, not saying they're actual cults.
Right. It's meant to capture the intensity and the consistency with which these companies instill and reinforce their core ideology. It goes way beyond just having a nice culture.
So what does that look like? What are these cult-like mechanisms?
It's a whole suite of things. Really rigorous screening and hiring to ensure ideological fit, intense indoctrination through orientation, training programs, internal universities, lots of storytelling myths about company heroes who embodied the values, unique language like Disney's cast members or on stage, off stage.
Little things that reinforce the identity.
Yeah, and bigger things too. Affirmations, pledges, tying bonuses and promotions explicitly to how well you fit the ideology, not just your numbers, tolerating honest mistakes, non-sins, but coming down hard on breaches of the core values, the real sins, creating buy-in, celebrating successes that align with the ideology, even using the physical layout of buildings to reinforce the culture.
Wow, it's really systematic. Very intentional.
Extremely intentional. Think about IBM under Watson Sr. The slogans, the dress code, the company songs, encouraging IBMers to socialize together, constantly reinforcing the idea that IBM was special, the greatest business. That was all part of building that intense culture. Or Disney's elaborate orientation, the language, the focus on making people happy, the strong emphasis on loyalty.
And Nordstrom, their service focus.
A classic example. Their cult of service involves celebrating employees who go above and beyond for customers, making them heroes, and having a very low tolerance for people who don't buy into that extreme customer focus. They say people who don't fit just get spit right out.
So the point isn't just having an ideology, it's building an organization that fervently preserves and reinforces it through all these tangible actions.
That's the key. That intensity, that alignment helps keep the clock ticking true over decades.
Okay, so how else do they keep it ticking? Maintain that drive and alignment for the really long haul.
Another fascinating concept is what they call mechanisms of discontent. These are systems built inside the company specifically designed to create discomfort, to root out complacency before the outside world forces it.
Deliberately making things uncomfortable. Why?
Because comfort is the enemy. Complacency kills progress. So visionary companies build in ways to constantly challenge themselves. Procter & Gamble's brand management system is the textbook example.
Where they have P&G brands competing against each other.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Ivory Soap competing fiercely against Chemie Soap, both from P&G. It forces continuous improvement and innovation internally, often staying ahead of external competitors because they're already battling it out inside.
Wow, creating internal competition.
Yeah. They also operate with a really long-term perspective. They're not just managing quarter to quarter, they're thinking 50 years out. HP's Sonoma conferences, where they defined the HP way like a constitution, planning for generations. Contrast that with TI later on, focusing on short-term price cuts that damaged their quality and long-term standing.
Thinking way beyond the current leadership.
Absolutely. And finally, they swim in your own current. They're guided primarily by their own internal compass, that core ideology, their own ambitions, rather than just chasing trends or following conventional wisdom, even if it looks weird to outsiders.
Marching to their own drummer.
Pretty much. Like J&J deciding to put its headquarters in a rundown area because their credo called for supporting communities, even if it wasn't the smart business location. Or Boeing setting higher safety standards for its planes than regulations required because their ideology demanded it. 3M sticking with broad innovation when everyone else was yelling, focus, focus. HP rejecting popular market share models because it didn't fit their goals. They decide their own path based on who they are.
So internally driven, not just reacting.
That's a great way to put it. So if you pull it all together, these companies last not because of a magic idea or a rock star CEO. They last because they focus relentlessly on building the organization, the clock. It has a soul, a core purpose beyond just money. They keep it wound tight with big goals and constant experimentation. They cultivate the people from within, build these intense, reinforcing cultures, and they install mechanisms to fight complacency and stay true to their own path over the very long term.
It's a really compelling framework, shifting the focus from the flash-in-the-pan stuff to building the enduring system. And the hopeful part is this isn't just for a select few chosen ones.
Exactly. That's maybe the most liberating message. Building a visionary company isn't some innate gift. It's not limited to people with amazing charisma or world-changing initial ideas. The core principles are largely learnable.
That's huge. So who can't do it then? Does the research point to any characteristics that make it impossible?
Yeah, it suggests a few things might disqualify you from building this kind of clock. If you're unwilling to stick it out for the long haul, this takes decades. If you like to rest on your laurels, if you lack that deep internal drive for constant progress, if you don't have a core ideology, if it really is just about the money for you, and maybe most importantly, if you don't genuinely care about the company's health and vitality after you're gone.
If it's just about building it, selling it, and walking away.
Then you're probably not building a visionary clock destined to last for generations.
It really comes down to commitment, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Commitment to the organization, the purpose, the long view, and that relentless improvement. More about mindset and dedication than genius.
Absolutely. You don't need to wait for the lightning strike idea or become a different person. You can learn the essentials and get down to the hard work of building.
Which definitely leaves us with something to think about. If these principles, building the clock with a soul, preserving the core while stimulating progress, are truly timeless, how do the companies you encounter every day measure up? The places you work, the brands you buy, the organizations you observe, are they consciously building an enduring clock with a purpose? Or are they just telling time, focused on the short term, maybe overly reliant on one leader or one product? And maybe more personally, what aspects of this clock-building mindset could you apply in your own context? Your team, your project, whatever it is you're trying to build.